The footage you see here is much more sinister than you think. At first it appears to be just a young couple, home after a fun night out. But what lies beneath the surface is shrouded in darkness and deceit. The footage you're about to witness is the final moments of Meg Newton's life, captured on these surveillance cameras. As she fumbles her key and gleefully makes her way to her flat, she's followed by Joseph Trevor, a former school friend and semi-professional footballer. In a gesture of kindness, Megan had offered him a place to stay for the night after learning of his troubled evening. She had run into him by chance at a nearby taxi rank, and after taking pity on him for the difficult night he had endured, she told him that he could crash on her couch and then make his way home the next morning. Their mood seems to be happy and nothing is out. Seemed that Megan was well on her way to achieve her goals and ambitions, and she was on course to leaving a lasting impression on the world. But then came that fateful day of 19 April 2019. On this day, Megan worked her shift at a local fish and chip shop and finished at around 10:20 p.m. It was the start of the Easter weekend, and as usually is the case, it was a bank holiday in Britain. With Megan's usual busy schedule, she was eager for a night out, and she saw this weekend as an ideal opportunity to head out and let her hair down. After finishing her shift, she headed straight home to freshen up and change into something more festive, as she had made plans with friends to go out later that night. She met up with her friends at around 11:30, and as is the case with a group of youngsters, for them the night was still young, and their anticipation was palpable. Megan and her friends hit the town, first stopping at a local bar to kick off the festivities. Glasses clinked and laughter filled the air as they toasted to the start of the Easter weekend. But the real festivities were just beginning. As the night went on and the party continued, the group made their way to a popular nightclub where the beat of the music was matched only by the rhythm of their feet. Those who were with Megan on that fateful evening recalls her being in high spirits, giggling and dancing the night away, proudly showing off her new tattoo, basking in the moment and living life to the fullest. The party eventually came to a grinding halt at 2:20. The party establishments were due to a close for the night, so Megan said goodbye to her friends and she made her way to a nearby taxi rank so that she could catch a cab back home. Little did she know that this seemingly routine journey home would become a fateful turning point in her life. When Megan got to the taxi rank, there was already a long queue, as other partygoers all seemed to have the same idea as her. Knowing that her wait would be long, she braced herself for a tedious wait. While standing in line waiting for a ride, Megan ran into Joseph Trevor, an acquaintance from school. Although the two weren't really staunch friends, their shared love for football often sparked conversation between the two. In fact, he was a semi-professional footballer, playing in goal for Newcastle Town. Joe, as he was more commonly known, also seemed to have a bright future ahead of him. He was the son of 2 police officers, and although his parents were strict, he had a normal upbringing and grew up in one of the most affluent parts of Stoke-on-Trent. He also did well academically and was in the process of studying for his A-levels and had already secured a scholarship to study at an American university. But it seems that despite his promising future, his path was far from certain. Unlike Megan, he appeared to lack the drive and determination needed to succeed, and he wasn't really willing to make the sacrifices needed to reach the very top. Despite his privileged upbringing, he was prone to getting into trouble at school, and his recreational drug use was a constant source of concern. In fact, while standing in line with Megan that evening, he told her of the disastrous evening he'd had. He said that he was at the same nightclub as Megan and her friends and confessed to drinking excessively and indulging in recreational drug use. It was at this nightclub that a bouncer caught him with a bag of ketamine, resulting in a run-in with the police. Joe was let off with a warning, but he told her that the last thing he wanted was to face the consequences at home while still under the influence. He told Megan that he was already in trouble with the police and he didn't want to go home intoxicated and get into any more trouble with his parents. Desperate for a place to stay until he sobered up, Megan handed him her phone so that he could call some friends and find someone to help him out. None of his friends answered his calls, and it seemed that Joe was in a bit of a pickle. In a moment of compassion, she offered her couch as a refuge for the night, and Joe gratefully accepted. Little did she know that this act of kindness would spark a chain of events that would change her life forever. Surveillance footage captures the moment where Megan and Joe gets into the cab and they start their journey back to her apartment. While in the cab on their way home, Joe actually received a text from his dad asking when he'd be returning home. At this point he lied and said that he was staying over at a male friend of his. Megan and Joe is then seen walking on the side of the road on their way back to her flat, and they eventually arrived at her apartment at around 4 a.m. Nothing seems to be out of the ordinary, and they are quite jovial. As Megan tries to unlock her front door, Joseph can be seen standing behind her. He takes a quick glance to his left and right, almost as though he was scouting his surroundings and checking to see if anyone spotted him arriving with her. Was this just a normal reaction, or was it an indication of the darkness that lay ahead? A few moments later the door is unlocked, and Megan enters her apartment, with Joe following closely behind. This is the last time Megan is seen alive. Around 90 minutes later, Joe is once again spotted on camera as he leaves the apartment. He needed Megan's key fob to exit the building, so scared of being found in possession of it, he walks to the dumpsters in her parking lot, and here he discards of the key. Footage from the next camera catches him walking along the street, where he takes a quick glance at his hands, and he seems to have blood on it. Joseph Trevor then walked for another 15 minutes towards a bridge over the A500, a major dual-carriage road in Stoke. Here he sits down at the edge of the bridge, with his feet hanging over the road below, before he catches the attention of a driver passing by. Alerted by the sight, the driver quickly notified the authorities, who immediately rushed to the scene. As the police apprehended Joseph, they carefully evaluated his mental state, determined to keep him from harm. After concluding that he was not a danger to himself, they called his father to take him home. Meanwhile, back at Megan's apartment building, another resident who was taking out the trash made a gruesome discovery. They found Megan's apartment key and fob stained with what appeared to be blood. Alarmed by the sight, they raced to Megan's door, pounding it with desperate urgency, anxiously waiting for a response. When the neighbours didn't receive a response from Megan, they used her keys to gain access to her flat, and they were greeted with a blood-curdling discovery. Megan lay motionless on her bed, her body marred by multiple stab wounds. They immediately called the police, who soon came out to investigate. When police investigated the scene, they determined that Megan had been strangled and stabbed a total of 9 times. She was also assaulted and raped, and it seemed the killer used one of the knives from her kitchen. They also noted that there was no signs of forced entry, so they were certain that Megan knew her attacker and that she actually opened the door for him. They immediately consulted the CCTV footage of her building, and after seeing that Joseph Trevor was the last person to exit her apartment and that he literally had blood on his hands, they knew that they'd found their man. A few hours later, police arrived at the home of Joseph Trevor and took him in for questioning. He admitted to police that he had been with Megan the previous evening, and he told them that they had consensual sex before his memory apparently went blank. He said that he didn't really remember what happened after that, but that he was 100% certain that he didn't kill Megan. Police definitely didn't buy his story, so he was arrested and charged with the murder of Meg Newton. Despite the mountain of evidence against him, Joseph Trevor remained steadfast in his claim of innocence, indicating that he intended to plead not guilty, and in the process forcing Megan's grieving parents to endure a full trial. The audacity to deny the truth and prolong their suffering only fueled the anger of those closest to Megan. After 10 months of gathering evidence, the state was ready to bring Joseph Trevor to trial for the heinous crimes he had committed. But before proceedings could even begin, Joseph stood up in court and shocked everyone in the room by declaring his guilt in the rape and murder of Meg Newton. The once defiant and insistent defendant now stood before the court, ready to tell them his version of events. He told the court that when he was 15 years old, he was accused of sexually assaulting a 14-year-old girl. Although the matter never went to trial, the stigma surrounding it followed him for years after. He said that he was often bullied at school and others referred to him as a pedo and even gave him the nickname Rolf Harris. He said that on the night of the murder, he had ran into Megan and the two had a brief conversation. At some point, Megan felt it prudent to apologize to him. She apparently told him that she was the one who had spread the word around school that he was accused of assaulting a 14-year-old girl. He said that when Megan admitted this to him, it had brought up old demons, and it was ultimately this admission that drove him to murder. The prosecution, on the other hand, didn't believe a word of Joseph's version of events, and they found it unlikely that Megan was the source of the rumours. She had always been nice to him, and they would always chat about their mutual love for football. The prosecution believes that when Megan invited Joe back to her place, it was purely platonic and she only did it out of kindness, because he had nowhere else to go. They said that Joseph's motives for going back to her place was sexual, and that he most likely tried to make a pass at her when they got back to her flat. The prosecution believes that Megan rejected his advances, and this caused Joseph to fly into a fit of rage. As someone who was always used to getting what he wanted, he couldn't handle not getting his way with Megan, so he ended up strangling her and ultimately stabbing her to death. Joseph Trevor was eventually sentenced to a minimum of 21 years and 65 days in jail before he could be considered for parole. This means that he may be back out on the streets by the time he turns 40, a fact that Megan's parents find difficult to digest. No amount of time could ever bring their loving daughter back, but they believe the light sentence Trevor got is much too lenient for the heinous crime he committed.